the Mississippi River on the Illinois side.
Oh,
So I just miss out on being in Cori Bush's district, but still, yeah, work closely with her.
so you're in Illinois then.
Yes.
Yeah. So you don't have Josh Hawley on your problem on your plate either.
No.
Oh, yeah. But that's good, Cori Bush. Yeah, she's been a good presence. Karen will give us a cue when it's time. I mean, then I'll say things more of the official type. Sandra, yours is ADLA is a national membership organization, or is it mostly?
We don't have a base. We do advocacy.
Okay.
So we're doing,
yeah. You get support, but not a member driven or member that way, but people.
Yeah, that's why what Anan did was so awe-inspiring, because it's not, it's not easy to build a base. We are struggling, I think, in the Palestinian movement to figure out how to do that again. Anan has lots of secrets. We need to tap into all of them.
You get to draw her out on these as we.
Happy to share my experience and to help if I could.
Yeah, good. We get start to come in. We'll get to hear more of that. Where Seattle's having unusual heat. I mean, it's becoming more usual the way things are going, but we're having, besides the smoke I mentioned earlier, we're having also, if it gets over 90, the whole city kind of wilts because people don't have air conditioning here, so in their houses.
So Sandra, we'll go how the conversation go. We don't have to stick to anything. You know what I mean?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Tells me the two of you sort of your conversations when they aren't supposedly scripted.
Conversation. And if no reading happened, that's fine. If so little happened, that's fine. I mean, just let's be natural and organic, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it'll be good. She's good, Sandra. We had a conversation.
Great.
And
that's what's been, I mean, these programs we've had, some have been with people who've never met or, talked before, or they maybe knew each other's work, but never even met. And so this becomes the closest that's happened. And others have been really good friends. But through it all, there's been this sort of nice air of, it's like, it is conversation because people are in their homes, or sometimes they're in borrowed quarters, cabins, things like that, or even back porches. Karen is saying, let's begin, because we have people still coming in on Zoom, but also on Facebook. And so to everyone who is joining us from the various places that you are, welcome. Thank you very much for coming and attending on this Friday that is smoky here in Seattle, where my colleague Karen and I are from the Elliott Bay Book Company, which is located on Duwamish land in Seattle, are delighted to be presenting this program, which features with us Anan Ameri with her newly published memoir, The Wandering Palestinian. And she's joining us from Ann Arbor, and joining her in conversation, and you'll hear a lot more, I'll say a little more about her, but Sandra Samaan, who's in St. Louis, and will be guiding this once we get going. The book that Anan's here with, The Wandering Palestinian, is I think you could say is a sequel to an earlier book she wrote that really was, has had a wonderful readership, an earlier memoir called The Scent of Jasmine, Coming of Age in Jerusalem and Damascus. The Wandering Palestinian takes up a place, I'm not gonna say too much because this will get talked about for all the places this conversation can go, but from her leaving Beirut in the 1970s and coming to the US, specifically to Detroit, and the rich, varied life she's had here since, now in Ann Arbor. One has had, all the challenges and obstacles and sometimes opportunities that are posed by immigration to this country. She has made more of that in more ways than many people, not only writing that memoir, but she has sort of stepped into areas not only important for Palestinian community here, but for other Arab American citizens and immigrants and refugees, as well as others in the country. She's founding director of the Arab American National Museum and also the Palestinian Aid Society of America. She has been a fellow at the Bunting Institute at Radcliffe, visiting scholar at Harvard, and as I think Sandra will draw out, she's formally but also informally played quite a role, a helpful, necessary role in fostering, in mentoring the efforts of others that are also similar in spirit and initiative. These are kinds of conversations we can't have enough of. Sandra Tamari, I'm forgetting my own advice to have water on hand, is joining us from St. Louis. As I said, she has been a long-time activist, excuse me, and is the executive director of the Adla Justice Fund. Karen, my colleague, will have links in the chat on not only Anan's book, but also some of the organizations she's been involved with, as well as Sandra's. Sorry about this. I'm going to get out of here in just a moment, and you'll be in their good hands. There are also links about the book, The Wandering Palestinian and the Scent of Jasmine. I will disappear. Sandra will take your questions also, please, to put in the chat. Sorry about this. And she will read those to Anand. And then my colleague Karen will come in at the very end to close this out. So again, for everyone at Elliott Bay, and one last part of this, I say, I'm mentioning Anand's being known to us as a writer. It's also the sort of familial way of things that a niece of hers used to live in Seattle, Alma Hassauni, and she has a few aunts who write books, but she would talk about this in this beaming pride. In fact, I thought if Alma had 20 aunts, all 20 might have written books. So she was so proud of them, but she was one of the people who made sure people, not only we, but other people knew about their work. And that's also, we miss her in Seattle and hope to pass greetings on to her one way or the other. So with that, now I thank you very much for joining us, and thank both Anan Ameri and Sandra Tamari for their part in this, doing this also later in the evening as where they are. And now please join in giving good welcome and attention to both Anan and Sandra. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Rick. And thank you, Karen. And thank you to everyone at Elliott Bay for hosting this. I'm just so honored to be here in conversation with my mentor, my friend, my idol, Anan Ameri, to celebrate her second volume of her two-piece memoir. This is The Wandering Palestinian, which really covers nearly 30 years, more than just about over 30 years of her life in the US, and really is framed by, major events in the history of Arabs and Arab Americans. Just, from 1974, just before the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War, to 2005, when she was able to inaugurate her beautiful project of the Arab American Museum in Dearborn in 2005, in some ways a reaction to 9/11, and really trying to overcome the ways that Arabs and Muslims had been depicted here in the US. I've known Anan almost 30 years. As a young graduate student, I moved to Washington, D.C. I was very green. I didn't know much about Palestine, except I knew that I needed to be active. I got at least that much from my family, and knew that it was an issue of great importance and a central part of my identity. And Anan was there to mentor me and to help me, sort of find my footing and my voice. So I want to turn to you, Anan, and ask you, you know, your story is it's just so beautifully written, and I hope people have read it or will, you know, buy the book and read it soon. But you cover so much in this, you know, these brief vignettes, many chapters, short, very engaging. Your immigrant experience coming to the U.S., very much a feminist narrative. You tell the story of, you know, Palestinian American grassroots organizing, and then a lot about institution building, how you built the Palestine Aid Society and the Arab American Museum. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you formatted the book and what you were trying to tell us in this memoir.
Well, I tried initially when I wrote this book, I actually wrote it for myself, and I wrote it, started at a period between jobs, and I was trying to reflect about what we do in our life and what motives we have and what makes us who we are, what incidents, what individuals in our life, and we end up the people who we are. And I wrote it in a small vignette, as you mentioned, for two reasons. One of them is it's like a storytelling, which is a very strong tradition in the Arab culture, that people sit down and tell stories. So I was doing it like telling stories that had left impact on myself. For example, seeing my father sitting with his friends, talk about Palestine and cry. And I was very young at the time, and how much that affected me. Or talking about my first visit to Palestine, or when I visited our house in Jerusalem, which we lived in it after 48, which is confiscated now. So these incidents, or taking a delegation to Palestine and go visit a settlement, and it brought to mind the freeways for Jews only to South Africa, to Detroit segregation, the connection between all these. So I wrote it, and initially not for publication, but as I was sharing things with my friends, and they say, "Oh, you have to publish, you have to publish." And after I retired, I took the time to sit down and rehash what I have written, and I see that my life is very much intertwined with the community activism in Michigan and in the United States. So when I talk about myself taking delegation to Palestine, I'm talking about Palestinian society. Or when I talk about, a few years that I spent with building the museum, I'm talking about community efforts. So hopefully, what I'm really hoping that when people read this book, not learn about me. I'm neither famous or rich or any of those things, but I am a person who was engaged in my community and would learn about the Arab American community, about the Palestinian aspiration through reading these books in a way that is not heavy. It's not a lecture about Palestine. It's not a lecture about immigration or something, but in a personal vignette, so personalize it, and people hopefully understand something from that about Arab American, Palestinian American, and immigrants and their struggle.
Yeah, no, speaking about immigration and your story, you came to the US, you're very well educated. You were well educated before you came to the US and before you got your PhD. You studied in Cairo, you worked as a journalist in Beirut. You had quite a career already going for you, applied quite a lot of political activism before you came. But you describe arriving in Detroit as a newlywed. And well, you weren't even married quite yet, but you were following a love
Yes.
coming to the US. And it was quite a culture shock. And it's, it was a kind of a different immigration story than what we hear often about people who come here with very little. So I wonder if you could reflect on that and tell us a little bit about what you hope other immigrants, whether they're Arab or other immigrants, maybe could take away from your experience.
First of all, when I came to America, I learned about, as you mentioned, I have my master's degree by the time I came here. My older sister had got her PhD from the United States. So I've traveled in Europe before I came, but somehow I was shocked when I arrived. I was shocked And I'd like to read a little passage about Detroit as I came, if you don't mind, and won't take long. And this is, just give me 1 second. Okay. Oops. You know, this is what about Detroit, and I'm talking about 1974, okay? To my surprise and disappointment, Detroit was a far cry from what I expected. It did not resemble what I saw on television or Hollywood movies. I couldn't believe that a major American city would pale in comparison to some Arab cities I lived in, including Detroit, Damascus, and Cairo. Although I was aware of the plight of African American, Detroit 1967 rebellion, and the civil rights movement, those were not enough to prepare me to deal with Detroit's harsh reality. Overnight, I found myself unable to walk to a store to buy a loaf of bread because there was none within walking distance, nor was there dependable public transportation to get me anywhere. And I couldn't walk the street of Detroit, especially after sunset, because it was not safe. But what shocked me the most was the abandoned and burned homes and the poverty-stricken and racially segregated neighborhood. It wasn't like I had never seen poverty before, especially in Palestinian refugee camps. And it wasn't like I couldn't see the resemblance of the injustice inflicted on both communities, but somehow Detroit's poverty and segregation seemed harsher and more hopeless. As I reflect on my early years in Detroit, life was hard, really hard. Love alone couldn't sustain me or save me from loneliness, isolation, and even depression. In spite of my comfortable living, without speaking English, knowing how to drive, or a permit to work, I lost my independence and I lost my identity and my pride. I felt uprooted, and much of what I took for granted was stripped away. I needed to create a different reality. I needed to reclaim myself and reclaim some of my losses if I was to survive living in this country. So, you know, people have this idealistic idea about people come from overseas and there are all these opportunities in this country. There are a lot of opportunities in this country. I'm not going to deny that. But leaving your family, you're leaving your country, leaving what you know, you come here, and I call it the chicken and the egg. I don't speak English. I have to learn English before I could go. You know, I was shocked. I want to take a class of English was like $200 or $300. Well, I want to get my BA and my master's degree, and I didn't spend $300 in tuition. It was free education. So that was another shock, like, and then you want to work, you don't speak English, you don't drive, you don't have money. If you can't work, you don't have money to buy a car. Like, you didn't know where to start. And it's like, ultimately, I, like other people, you know, survive, and immigrants tend to be resilient and they fight, but it's not as easy as most people think. You come here and there's everything open for you, and it's a struggle. Even for somebody like me, I met my husband in Lebanon, and we married here, and he was very comfortable living. I mean, he was making good money, but like the idea of asking him for money was too hard for me. I worked before I came. I had my own money. I had my own job. So all these people don't think of when they think of immigration, how hard it is.
Yeah, your husband, your first husband, the one that you met in Lebanon, was an Arab American, and you write really beautifully about his family and about how, you know, different it was. They came from a very rural place. They had been in America for a long time. And much like my family who came to the US, you know, my mother's family came from Palestine in 1936, her parents, and my father's, you know, most of his family came to the US in the 60s. We kind of cling to traditions and don't like evolve, because that's it. You know, you hold on to what you know, and to evolve means that you lose traditions. And and your descriptions of Adin's family really struck a chord with me, in that they really were clinging to old traditions, and that came up against your very cosmopolitan upbringing. And I wonder if you could say a word about that.
Well, as I said, we don't really, if you're far away and you don't really know America, you assume because people have been here longer that, they're more cosmopolitan, they're more, worldly, or, and I have to admit something, that I have nothing but love and respect for my ex-husband family. They are wonderful, wonderful people. But what really struck me is how much they clung to a culture that is no longer there. I think if they go there, they will be shocked. Because what happened actually is change is come to places gradually. It's natural thing. Like Detroit is not the same Detroit when I came, 40 years ago. Your life is different than your parents' life. Change come gradual. But for immigrants who come here, in their mind to preserve their culture is to preserve what they know when they came here. So my mother-in-law came here to this country in 1905 or 03, I forgot. She was 3 years old. And they homesteaded in North Dakota. And the government used to give 160 acres of land for people. And if they harvest it for 5 years, it's theirs. But think about it, like your neighbor, closest neighbor is 160 acres from you. So she got married and moved to Mansalona, which is a very small town in Michigan. And her husband's Lebanese came and worked in the lumber industry in Michigan. And they had a grocery store. And ultimately her sister followed, and her brother followed, and her family followed. And so their community was like 3 families of the same friends. And they knew everybody because they have a grocery store. It's a small town. But like I remember my mother-in-law was baking bread in her basement, this very thin Arabic bread. And she was telling me, I'm so happy my husband, Abdin, her son, got married to a woman from the old country because I couldn't have my kids keep the tradition of making this bread. And I looked at her and I said, we never baked bread at the house. She said, you never baked bread? I said, no. I said, we bought it from the store. And her eyes got so big. You bought, like they made cheese, they canned their own fruits, they canned their vegetables. And that's the way they lived. And then they were very, very strict division of, gender roles. That was big in their family. And that was actually maybe one source of uncomfortable with me, let me say the same. Although my mother-in-law, God bless her soul, she is one of the kindest, most generous human being. But that's what she knew. That's what she knew. That's what she dedicated her life to. Being Arab, you plant your vegetable, you take care of your family, you serve your kids, and it was very different than what I grew up.
I mean, your whole book is full of such honest portrayals of your inner life and your inner thoughts. But one chapter in particular, I think it was very brave to write. You describe a Thanksgiving gathering with Abdin and his mother and the big family. Could you read a little bit from the chapter where you almost killed your husband on Thanksgiving Day?
I almost killed my husband. Yes, that's the title of the. That's the title, and give me a second to find it. Yes. Now, let me say a few things before I read, so I put in a little bit context. When I came here, my husband's sister, my sister-in-law invited us 2 years in a row for Thanksgiving. By the 3rd year, I told my husband, it's not right, every year we go to your family, we should invite your family. And as it ended up, we invited them every year. I mean, it was like I suggested we invite them and they came every year. And his mother will come a few days early to help me. And as I said, she's really an angel, that woman. But, the tradition, women will cook and sit in a kitchen and the men will sit and play a card. And then my husband, every 5 minutes, Aini, which is sweetheart, can you get us more coffee? Aini, can you get us more cheese? Aini, can we have sugar? Aini, have cream. So Aini, I was ready to grab the pot and hit him on his head. So I said, I almost killed my husband. And I was born on November 23, which is many times Thanksgiving coincide with my birthday. So I spent all my birthdays in a kitchen cooking dinner for my in-laws. So this ago, I still have a vivid memory of the night I almost killed my husband. It was on my 40th birthday. After dinner, the men sat in the dining room playing cards. We, the women, went into the kitchen to clean, and believe me, there were plenty to clean after feeding 35 people. Had I complained about the unfair division of labor or about being tired, my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law would have said, oh, honey, if you're tired, why don't you go sit down? We will cook or clean or wash the dishes. Had I said, that's not the point, they would have asked, what is the point? I love my in-laws, or most of them to be exact. They loved me too. And while they were Arab American like myself, they were very different. We had what you might call a cultural gap. I grew up between Amman and Damascus during the 50s and 60s, a period when we were struggling to change our male-dominated society. The newly independent Arab countries were taking pride in their free public education. Women, especially from urban middle class, were attending universities in relatively large number. My in-laws, on the other hand, except for their mother, were born and raised in a small town of Mansalona. In their struggle to preserve their culture, like most immigrants, they overkept some of it, left intact and left intact the part that made me almost kill my husband. Men were men, women were women, and each accepted and stuck to their role.
That was a very telling and beautiful chapter. There are many parts of this book that made me laugh out loud. Part of it is because the people that you spoke of are people that are known in our community. And it was very refreshing to hear them, put into this, into a different light. I also know your ex-husband, Abdeen. He is a darling person. And so, and he's very generous. When I asked him, what do you think of this book? Because it is very honest about, the way that, the marriage was. He was very generous and said how proud he is of you and how he loves the story. So kudos to you for managing to be so honest and not make anyone really mad at the same time. That's an art form. I want to turn a little bit to your Palestine organizing, and then I do Palestine organizing, and it's a very difficult and tiring and sometimes demoralizing project. The Palestinian issue continues to be one that dominates the lives of millions of people. Refugees, continue to be exiled. And you coming to America brought you so far away from your homeland, at least living in Jordan, living in Lebanon, living in the region, you were close and in contact with people. But as you stayed in the US to get your citizenship, you were not able to really go to Palestine or to be back in your birthplace. You were born in Jaffa, I believe, or Jerusalem.
No, I was born in Damascus, but only because my mother, when she delivered babies, she went to her father's house in Damascus and delivered babies there. But we were living in Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, because I was born before 1948. Yes,
and then you were exiled after the Nakba, after the rupture.
My parents were living in West Jerusalem and had two children, myself and my older sister. And as the conflict accelerated, they sent us to Damascus, to my mother's house. My mother's, as I said, my mother's Syrian, my father's Palestinian, to my grandparents, so they can move easily, and there were war, and kind of protect us from that ugliness. And we stayed there with my grandparents for a while, over a year, until they settled. They settled in East Jerusalem, and that's the house I first remember. And then my family ultimately moved to Amman and settled in Jordan.
I see. So you were able to make it back to Palestine after you got your U.S. citizenship, because that's the case with many Palestinians, that we are, only allowed in as tourists, and only if we have the right kind of passport to allow us back in. Could you say a little bit about, your time, your trip there, and what it brought up for you?
When before 1967, we lived in Amman, Jordan, but the West Bank is very close to Jordan. You can go to Jerusalem in a little bit over an hour, and you can go to Ramallah an hour, So often, my father on a Friday and my mother will take us to Jerusalem. We spend the day in Jerusalem, the old market. We visit some of my family friends, or we go in the summer to Ramallah also, stayed in this hotel that my father knew the owner, or in the winter we go to Jericho, So although I never lived in Palestine, but Palestine was part of our daily conversation, and we went but then 67 happened, and we couldn't even go to the West Bank. We were totally cut off unless we have a permission from, Israel. My father's friends, he had family in Jaffa still, and some friends who are Israeli citizens, and they managed to get him a visa to visit. And he went to Palestine for a visit, and he went to visit his house in Jerusalem, in Jaffa. He had a house in Jaffa, and he knocked at the door, and he wanted to see his house, and the people threatened him to call the police, and he left. And I remember him coming back home and telling us the story and crying. So I really wanted to go. I want to go see Jaffa, because my father always talked about it. He talked about his friend. But I couldn't go. So when I came here after 1974, I came here, and by the early 80s, I got my citizenship. We created Palestine Aid Society in late 70s, 78, right after, as a result of the civil war in Lebanon. It was a reaction to the civil war in Lebanon and the displacement of many Palestinians. So, and soon after, we start taking delegation to Palestine, but I could never go. Here we organized delegation to go to Palestine, and these delegation were writers, teachers, unionists, journalists, attorneys, and we connect them with people of, similar interest overseas. And I organized this, and I could never go. So in 1983, I went on my first trip, and it was very, very emotional trip, really very emotional trip,
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be exiled and hard to be away, right? We saw, just a few years ago how even a member of Congress, Rashida Tlaib, was prevented by the Israelis from even entering with a U.S. passport. I myself was banned.
You were sent, right?
Yeah, in 2012, when I tried to enter at the airport, was jailed because of my, identity as a Palestinian, and because of my outspokenness. So I hope that you can continue to go, because I know you still have family there. I want to talk a little bit about your work with the Palestine Aid Society. This is quite a remarkable accomplishment you did, building up this institution that had chapters throughout the country, made up of Palestinians and other Arabs, but other and non-Arabs as well, Jewish members and others that joined together to raise funds, humanitarian funds, to send back to different parts of Palestine and the Arab world, but really also had a very strong political grounding. There's a lot of tension in the movement for Palestine today, where you either are on the side of, you know, humanitarian aid, and you really want to talk about Gaza as a humanitarian disaster, but not at all mention, you know, the reason for that humanitarian disaster, and avoid the political discussion. So there's a lot of tension between those who advocate for Palestine and talk about, you know, the root cause, which is, you know, Israel's, you know, logic of elimination of Palestinians, versus people who want to raise money for Palestine. How did you thread that tension, or manage that tension within Palestine Aid Society?
I think the reason Palestine Aid Society came into existence were two, actually. One of them is that because of the war in Lebanon, as I said, there were many displacement of Palestinian at the time, and you know, soon after Sabra and Shatila, so we connected with organization in Lebanon that doing some humanitarian work, focusing on women and women training, women in finding jobs, and that appealed to me. On the other hand, you know, I'm a political person, and I lived in Lebanon, and to see what's happening in Lebanon, I worked in a Palestine Research Center. I taught in Sabra and Shatila as a volunteer. I saw 1967 war. So I connected the both. In the United States at the time, there were a lot of American Arabs who really supported Palestinian, but there were no non-political organization in the sense that ideological, political, you know. They want to support Palestine. They understood the injustice of the Palestinian, but they don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of the PLO and this faction and that faction. And we thought that this energy must be captured in an organization that is progressive, that make relationship with other groups that have similar interests, and at the same time raise money for Palestinians. So the mission of the organization was actually of three parts. One of them is nonprofit to help Palestinians politically and financially. So it was in our mission is to advocate for Palestinian self-determination and support them politically, financially, and culturally. And we also wanted to instill a sense of pride among Palestinians in this country of who they are. So there were many cultural activities. There were delegation from youth. We created a new generation of Palestine. Maybe that's how you entered Palestinian society, and took them to Palestine to learn about their country. And we connected them with people of their age. So it was like grounded in their vision, because charity, I mean, there are not poor people in the United States if it's only charity. But we connected the charity. Palestinians need help, but also Palestinian, more importantly, in my personal opinion, Palestinian problem is not a poverty problem, okay? It's not. It's a political problem. It's an apartheid system. And people say Palestine is very complicated. And I say it's very simple. If you understand what happened to Native American in this country, that people from other countries came here, they didn't want to live with them. They want to live and dominate them. The Israeli came from all over the world. They don't want to live with us. They want to dominate us. They want us out. And the Israeli project is very unsuccessful. It will never succeed, simply because if you want to go to a land that's inhabited by Palestinian, by other people, and you want to transfer it, like Palestine had people, the Palestinian inhabited, and they want to turn it into a Jewish state, while the overwhelming Palestinians were not Jews. So you either kick them out or you massacre them. In this country, we massacred most of Native American. In South America, they created a system. So it's not that complicated to understand. It's the apartheid colonialist system. And that's what motivates me. It is not the charity, because as I said, there are poor people around the world. You know, you have to tie it to the politics of the organization. If that makes sense to you.
Oh, absolutely. You were doing, I mean, we call it intersectionality today. You were doing it long before, and maybe that's because of your outsiderness to this country, you were able to see things maybe more clearly than some who, were brought up in this, settler kind of mentality in this country. I want to invite people who are listening in to send in your questions either on the Facebook Live, in the comments, or on the chat, because we're going to turn to those questions soon. I want to ask you, Anan, your book, covers such amazing terrain, but I want to turn to your work on the opening of the Arab American Museum in Dearborn, and a project that you just brought to life. Really, no one even thought it was possible. The final chapters of the book really talk about your research and your fundraising and your efforts. And so can you say a bit about the importance of a museum dedicated to Arab Americans?
It's unfortunate the reason there are ethnic museums in this country, Japanese American, Asian American, Latin American, you name it, is because we have been excluded from mainstream institutions. Okay. If you go to a mainstream institution, you see something about the pharaohs, like Egypt in 4,000 years have nothing happened. We're still talking about the pharaohs. I mean, it's a huge civilization, but you don't see anything about the people now. You don't see anything about Arab American now, And what you know about Arab American is what you read in the newspapers, what you see on television. And I remember when I first came to this country, I was shocked. Here, think about it, Sandra. I'm a woman, I'm a Palestinian, I'm a Muslim, I'm an Arab. With all the bad things that people think of this country, I am the embodiment of that thing, And I'm sure many people might not articulate it in the way I'm articulating it now, but this is how we feel. We feel like we're not good enough. And people talk about us. They tell our story. We don't have a chance to tell our story. So I thought and the museum was a process. It wasn't like I went to sleep and dreamt about it. I was working with Access. I was the director of their cultural art program, and we start talking about expanding the program, making our voice more heard, have more visibility, and gradually the idea of the museum emerged. We talk about cultural center, this and that. So it emerged, but the motive behind it is that we have to have a presence in this country. We are part of this country. Our story is the American story, and people have to hear our story from our perspective. I want to talk about myself. When somebody can tell me you are an exception, no, I'm not exception. They didn't open Cairo University for Anan Ameri to go there. There's thousands of other women and men going to the university. Same thing apply. I'm not the only journalist in the Arab world in my time. People don't know the Arab world, and then they assume certain things, and they don't know much about Arab American. We are an invisible community. Actually, the sad part about it is until 9/11, for most people, we are invisible. Nobody knew about us and about our contribution, about how long we've been in this country. And I remember working on the museum and trying to collect story. And I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and there's a club for the Ramallah Club. And there's this guy told me, you were from there. At the club, he said, my grandfather fought in World War II. My father fought in this war. I fought in this war. We lost so many people in our family, and we're still not American. What is it going to take for us to become American? You have doctors, you have nurses, you have teachers. We have all kinds. You have people working on the line of car industry, but we're not acknowledged. We're not acknowledged. And that's what really pushed us, that we need to have a place where we tell our own story from our own perspective, where Arab Americans can come and read books, they can exhibit their work, they can perform, and the community can meet and discuss issues that of concern to them.
It's such a beautiful institution, and it's such a beautiful building. It's such a beautiful gathering space, and there's so much that I learned going through the museum. So we owe you such a gratitude of debt, and thankful to the people that continue to maintain it, to curate it, and to open it up to our community. It's something really that we all are very proud of. So thank you, Anan, for all your contributions.
It wasn't my work. It's, you work with an institution. We say it take a village to raise a child. It really took hundreds for the museum and Palestine Aid Society. It took hundreds of people to make it happen. I just was the lucky person to lead the organization or to gain the trust of people to allow me to lead the organization, but it's absolutely not my doing. Really, honestly, it's not.
Well, you're humble, but that's okay. We'll take that. There's a question that just came in. It's asking, what is happening with the museum now with COVID? Are there films or other online programs?
There's actually amazing program happening online, and maybe that was the silver lining of COVID. Yes, the museum is closed, continue to be closed, but they have been very, very creative in their programming. And if you go to their website, just ArabAmericanNationalMuseum.org, you will be amazed by the program. And what's interesting about the program, they didn't do much online before. They did online, and now they are able to reach people all over the country. They are able to reach people overseas, and we all are discovering the power of the internet.
Amazing. I wonder, with the latest uprisings in Palestine in May, June, if you have any hope, right? I wonder what's giving you hope about the future of our people.
Three things give me hope. One of them is the resilience of our people in Palestine. They're not going anywhere. They learned their lesson from 1967, from 1948, like my family, they left. They were thinking it's too weak and they'll go back. They're not going anywhere. So we are 50% of the population there. So you can't rule forever 50% of your oppressor. The other thing is that the younger people really give me hope. I mean, they are so much more sophisticated than we were. They are so, able to do stuff. It's a different time. And also the international support that Palestinian happening. And one thing that really give me hope is to see the change that's happening within the Jewish community. Ultimately, people came to realize, that really Israel is not that really innocent, poor, small country. It's surrounded by the myths that Israel created around itself. Many, many Jewish people in the younger generation are not buying that.
I didn't vet this question with you before, so this is going to be, on the fly. There's so much really raw and honest material in this book. It's very vulnerable, but I wonder if there's something that you edited out because you thought it was too vulnerable.
I edited out certain things, not because it's too vulnerable, it's because when you write memoir and do the kind of work I did, there are hundreds of people that were involved. So it's not about me, but it was hard to talk about other people without going to them and find where they are after 20 years and get their permission and give them the material to read and approve it. So that was a challenge for me to write. And also I want to be honest, I went and dug files and files and files. I still have a ton of files of Palestine Society in my basement to read them, to be sure that I'm being accurate, So I did not try to hide anything except for the privacy of people who had shared this journey with me. Either they not comfortable or I did not feel comfortable talking about them without their permission. And I was not, it's too many people. It become an endless mission to try find these people and tell them what you're saying. And so I changed names, I changed location. If I thought the story is important, I changed the name, I changed the location. So you might read something in Chicago, but it's really happening in Indiana, for example. But not the essence was honest.
So the story of you fundraising at a belly dance strip club is true.
It's true. It's true. Maybe not in the same city. Maybe it's not, but it's true. Yes.
That was great. Shiraz is asking, do you have any plans to make a film based on your book?
I'm not a filmmaker. If somebody want to come and make a film of my book, they're welcome, but I'm not really, I didn't even think there. I didn't go there.
I think it would make a very amazing and funny film. Who do you think could play you in a film, Anan?
I don't really know.
You haven't thought of that one, huh?
I didn't think about that one, no.
I think we're going to wrap up pretty soon unless there are other questions, but I want to, congratulate you on this book and really encourage people to run out and buy it and buy both of your memoirs. They're really important. Karen is asking if I can tell a little bit about the Adalah Justice Project. As Anan mentioned, I got my start in Palestine activism really through her work. Palestine Aid Society was taking delegations, New Generation for Palestine, delegations of young Palestinian Americans to Palestine. So I was 20 years old. It was 1991, I believe, when a delegation was going out. And so there were about 20 of us that were going to Palestine, most of us for the first time. And it was also, the tail end, but also during the first Intifada. So it was an amazing political education where I learned about, the power of collective resistance and the power of women's movements, and the power of unions and labor. And that stayed with me. And so my career and my life has been dedicated to organizing around Palestine. And so I currently run something called the Adalah Justice Project. And we're an advocacy organization. We're small, but we very much are grounded in many of the principles that Anan's work has always been grounded in, that Palestine is not an exceptional issue. It's very much grounded in an analysis that it's, a settler colonial problem. Like others, like the ones here in the US, in Canada, Australia, and many other places in the world. And that, you in Zionism, which is the political ideology that motivates, the Israeli government to expel Palestinians from their land is a racial project as well, that it has, white supremacist, ideology behind it. So we see ourselves as very much connected to Black struggle in this country, to Indigenous struggle in this country. And so the work that we do is forging those ties and taking, our demands together collectively to the powers of this country to influence change. And so that's the work we're doing. I don't do the amazing base building work that Anan has done in her life, but I'm hoping that, I can continue to learn from her, and maybe there's another iteration of Palestine Aid Society in the offing. I think that's what you have in mind, Anan, is that right?
Yes.
Are you thinking about reinvigorating PAS?
Yes, I am thinking that I would like to continue being involved in the Palestinian issue. And, there is a chapter in Ann Arbor Palestine Aid Society that is active, and we'd like to make it more active.
That's great. Well, it's such an honor to be in conversation with you, Anan. I'm going to turn it over to Karen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much for this wonderful program. And I just wanted to give both of you a chance to talk about any current projects that you're working on that you'd like to mention before we close out the program. Sandra, you want to go?
Sure. So Adalah Justice Project is, I encourage you to follow us on social media and to go to our website that Karen, I think, dropped, and follow us, on our email list as well. We have a couple of things that we're working on. Obviously, the uprisings in Palestine earlier this summer have, put us in a very busy period. So we're working to support folks, Palestinians who are citizens of Israel that are from territories that were occupied in 1948. There were many, many arrests of people that were participated in the uprisings. And if you remember the news reports, there were loads of Israeli settler vigilantes that were hunting down Palestinians. There were only a handful of Israeli Jewish settlers that were indicted, but over 200 Palestinians are facing indictments, more than half of them minors from working class families. So we're working to raise, in many ways, the same way that PAS would, raise funds for legal aid for these 200 cases. And we're also working on a new to launch a campaign in the fall that's specifically about Gaza, because Gaza is a place that gets a lot of attention when bombs are falling, but tends to, be a seasonal concern. And when, people believe there's, there's no violence that's happening if there's not a war, but obviously the siege and the blockade and the aftermath and the trauma of that war continues. So look out for information on how you can get involved in that campaign. Anan, what are you working on?
I was working on another novel, but based on a real life of a Palestinian woman I knew. But with COVID, somehow I don't find myself. I have all the time. I don't find myself able to focus because writing needs really certain set of mind. I'm working right now. I'm helping the Arab American National Museum collect oral histories from activists who are older in age, because we've lost a few people that I really regret not doing their oral history. And now with the Zoom, you can do it without traveling. So that's one project. And I'm on, work with the Ann Arbor, Community Police Oversight Commission. So we work with watch the police and their treatment of minorities. Basically, I'm on the board of a couple more organizations. One does a concert in Detroit, Concert of Color, which is minorities get together and create this 3-day concert, 4-day concert actually. And I'm on the museum board. So I keep busy, but my heart is with Palestine. I always feel like that's where I need to put more energy and support the people who on the ground there.
Let us know when you have room to join our board.
Good move. So thank you both so much for your words, for your time tonight, for your activism. The oral histories are so important. Our memoirs are so important. We have a Japanese American. I'm Japanese American. We have something called Densho. It has been such a wonderful treasure trove. And so I'm so glad that you're involved in that as well. And hope to see that novel soon, as soon as it can come. But in the meantime, thank you everyone who attended and who's attending on Facebook and who's watching later. We have copies of The Wandering Palestinian by Anan Ameri, and we hope that you'll read that. And thank you, Anan, and also Sandra Samaan for joining us tonight for the Elliott Bay Book Company. And good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.